Without further delay, Mr. Brian Cox.
Thank you, April. Appreciate it. Yeah, thank you all for coming out tonight. I'm honestly surprised at how many folks have come out, so thank you so much. If any of you decide to leave halfway through, I will completely understand, because the truth is, the hobby of metal detecting and the presentation on metal detecting, not for everybody, but nevertheless, I'll try and make this as interesting as possible. What I'm going to talk about tonight, just a touch about me and about metal detecting itself, but I'm going to spend some time on Mendham and why I've spent a lot of time detecting at Mendham. Hi, Michelle. Oh, I saved you a seat right up front. This is my wife, Michelle. She'll be in one of the pictures coming up. So I'm going to talk a little bit about why Mendham has been a great place to metal detect. I'm also going to zero in on a couple of locations, and I'm going to talk about the research that I did to try and decide why I would want to detect in those locations. And then I'm going to talk a lot about the finds that I've actually found throughout the years of detecting here. There'll be more time for question and answers, although we did have a good opportunity for that in the beginning. So, my family and I are 20-year residents of Mendham. As April mentioned, we are leaving later this month to move down to Delaware, but it's been a fantastic 20 years in town. Our children have grown up here and loved every minute of it. The other thing I like to say is I'm not a professional detectorist. This is just a hobby for me. I'm also not a professional historian. So while I do a lot of research and I can talk about the history of a lot of what I've found or where I've detected, I'm certainly not a professional. So I'll do my best to answer questions if I can. I often get asked, okay, how did you get started in metal detecting? So I'll address that one right up front. So my son, Andrew, who's off at college, and I started on the beach of Delaware. We borrowed my father's metal detector and went out there and started hearing beeps and thought that was neat. In Delaware, there is a beach called Coin Beach. It is north of the Indian River Inlet, south of Rehoboth, and it's called Coin Beach because in 1785, the Faithful Steward wrecked there. On its way, they were trying to get to Philadelphia in a storm. They didn't make it to Philadelphia, and they were coming from Ireland with 300 barrels of copper coins, mostly copper coins, in their hold. And so they've washed up throughout the decades and centuries on the beach, and they still wash up today during big storms. I have never found one of the coins, but we did find a decking spike and a watch winding key with initials on it from the shipwreck. And what I love about that is even though there were 300 barrels of coins, so thousands and thousands and thousands of coins, there were only about 250 passengers. And out of them, how many had pocket watches? So finding the pocket watch winding key was actually much more special to me than finding one of those coins. And I guess the one more part of that story is we didn't know what we had found because it was in this concretion is what they call it. And we had to take it to an expert to help us figure it all out. So don't throw away things you find because you never know we almost threw it away. Side item, we also enjoy gold prospecting. That's us, my son, me, and my father up in New Hampshire, where there is a little bit of gold in the rivers. That's from a typical trip up to New Hampshire, so not a life-changing amount of gold, but it's still fun to see gold in the pan, and we do all of that. But where things really started, and Derek, I'm glad you're here because this is the first shout out to Backer Farm, where we really started getting excited about historical metal detecting is at Backer Farm. And I'm going to talk about why Backer Farm was so special to us in just a little bit. The other thing I get asked is, why do you metal detect? Well, certainly the thrill of the hunt and discovering things, that's part of it, obviously. By the way, that is me with the gear on, so I can go underwater looking for jewelry that people have lost. That was down in Florida, earlier this year, I think, right? But I also really love researching the things I find. So if I find something I'm not sure what the heck this thing is, I love bringing it home, cleaning it off, and being, oh my gosh, that extra discovery of, well, wow, I found something really interesting. And as an example, this ugly thing down here, if you look closely, there's an 8 and an M, and that is a shield, and there's a crown right there. This is a pewter button made in the 1700s to mirror to of the image of a Spanish 8 real coin. It was much smaller, so it wasn't just like pressed into the pewter. But it turns out this was a style in the 1700s to put Spanish-looking coins as buttons on your clothes. And I had no idea what it was until I did a whole lot of research into finding out what the history was, and loved it once I found it. To me, the value is not monetary. I never sell anything I find. I keep it all. And a lot of it's sitting right over there. Some of you have looked through the display case, and that's the shelf that I have things on at home, which is the same stuff that's there. I put all the coins I find that are of interest in those books over there, so feel free to flip through the years of detecting. And they go back to 2019, 2020, so that's really the time frame that I've been maybe more serious about this. And then I also love researching the history and places to detect, finding new places that no one would ever expect. And then it just kind of becomes a closed loop. So I'm going to talk a lot about this, researching the history and where to look in just a moment. Let me talk a little bit about how metal detecting works, just in case you don't know. So this is the metal detector. It sends out electromagnetic waves into the ground. Think of it like a flashlight that can shine down through the ground, and then the electromagnetic waves bounce off metal and give this information about what it saw. Now, the detectors that are, at a Walmart or the maybe less sophisticated ones will beep when it gets metal, and that's fine. But if you really want to dig less garbage and more good stuff, the better detectors will tell you the type of metal, the size of the object, sometimes the shape of the object, the depth of the object. And by listening as well as looking at what's on the screen, you can really tell, or at least have a good guess of what's in the ground. I also use a special shovel. And the reason I do this is because I asked for permission to dig in a lot of people's yards, and I don't want to mess it up. I was an Eagle Scout, and I want to just leave no trace. And so this helps me cut down through either roots or the dirt into a nicely shaped plug that I can just put right back in. And that way it really doesn't disturb the dirt at all. Another critical item is a thing called a pinpointer. At least I think it's critical. There are people who don't use them, but I like using these. Once the detector tells me where to dig the hole, this tells me where the tiny little thing is in all that dirt. Because it's actually really hard to find a tiny little thing in all that dirt. So you just turn it on, and as it gets closer to metal, it'll buzz. And you dig it around in the dirt, and then you find your item a lot faster. So, plus I use, gloves, boots. I use these pants, which is why I wore them tonight. These dirty pants are affectionately called my adventure pants. And they have, padding built into the knees. And then I spray them with a lot of bug spray, because I'll go out into the woods and the ticks are terrible. So bug spray keeps those away. Let me move on to why Mendham is a great place to detect, and then talk a little bit about some of the places that I've detected using the research. So I know everybody knows that Mendham is a historic town, but I bet you don't know that we either have or are adjacent to 7 different historic districts. And the neat part about that is you can go to the National Register of Historic Places website and find the documentation on all of those different historic districts. And in there's hundreds of pages describing the buildings, describing potentially stone foundations out in the woods that used to be a building. And so I've read a lot of those. I have them saved on my hard drive. And in the winter, when I can't go out and detect, I'm reading things like this to try and research where I'm going to detect next. But Mendham is also a challenging place to detect. There's been a lot of development, and someone asked about Pitney Farm earlier. So, I was lucky enough to get in there before the development happened and at least save a few things that would have otherwise been buried in the new park, which is great, by the way. Love the new park. But the thing that really breaks my heart is seeing septic systems go in. Because you take this giant section of dirt and you just move it away and put in the septic and then put some dirt back. But it really you can tell when you go out metal detecting ground that's been disturbed with septic or with the landscaping. I mean, listen, it's required, right? We all have to have it. I have one, but still, it's a bummer, because a lot of history has probably been lost under parking lots or in septic systems. And the other thing is, As I've learned, there's at least two more detectorists in the audience. There's a lot of detectorists in Northern California or Northern New Jersey. And I've run into quite a few of them out there. You'll be driving along, coming back from Home Depot, and oh, look, there's two guys metal detecting in Mendham, and I don't know them. And so I stop and I talk to them. And sometimes they're friendly, and sometimes they do not want to talk to you because they're very protective of where they're metal detecting. So it's a challenging place to metal detect. So these are the places I try to detect. You know, public spaces, they're certainly a good choice. And my son and I got started here in Mendham, not just in Backer Farm, but also in Meadowood, which is on the Chester side of Mendham. Used to be an old camp, and campers, kids especially, lose a lot of things. My quick story about Meadowood is that we found 6 or 7 silver coins right near the tennis courts, if you've ever been there. And we thought we did great. And then I was at this metal detecting event over in Pennsylvania, and I was talking to people about where I'm from. And these guys are like, oh, we've actually metal detected in your town. Do you know a park called Meadowood? We walked away with a pocket full of silver coins. I'm like, oh, anyway. So other detectorists, you know, Northern New Jersey, very, very common. So I actually prefer old home sites or old houses where I knock on the doors. Those are way more fun. And when I'm looking for those, I'm looking at old maps, historic aerial photography. I use Google Maps and Google Earth. And then more recently, I've started looking at LIDAR. And I'm going to talk about each of those 4 techniques next. But there are also plenty of places that are off limits. Obviously, private property, if you don't have permission, you can't go on there. And I'm very careful to respect the boundaries of people's property. And so I only want to go somewhere where I have permission. The other one that's really, really strict is do not step foot in Morristown National Historic Park. That's a big no-no, and any national park anywhere in the country is off limits. The wildlife management areas are off limits because New Jersey doesn't want you to get shot. They would rather just say it's strictly off limits than put together weird times that detectorists are allowed and hunters are allowed, and so you just don't go near those. And then the one I'm not so sure about is Lewis Morris County Park, because I've gone there, I've talked to the park police, they've said, sure, you can do it. And then one of the administrators kicked me out, and I'm not going to fight with somebody, so I just left, but I won't go back anymore. But it's a county park, and there's plenty of other fun things done in county parks. So anyway, those are off limits, so keep that in mind. Okay, let me move on to one of the examples of research I've done. Now, show of hands, how many of you have ever seen this 1853 map of Mendham? A few of you, okay. All right, so it's available on the Rutgers website, and I've got the link to it at the end of this presentation. This is from 1853. They did this for the entirety of Morris County. This map maker made them for all of, like they did Pennsylvania, they did all of New Jersey. You can tell it's an artist, frankly, back in 1853 that did this. But it's really neat because it shows the way Mendham was back in 1853. Now, this is the way Mendham is today. You know, there's your Kings, there's obviously the borough, the high school, etc. Let's overlay the old map on top of the new map, because this is what I do at home. Okay, let me do it one more time. So you can see by going back and forth what has changed throughout the years. Now, let me dive into a specific area, and that is Backer Farm. So Backer Farm's over here on the west side of town. From the air today, it looks roughly like this. The pumpkin patch, or what's now some other crop, is out here to the north of where the house and the barns are. And in 1853, that was the Forsyth and the Lawrence house area, or the properties, okay? It was right there along what is Ironia Road, and back then didn't have a name. Well, let's take that and overlay them. So if you take Backer Farm today and you put that little section of the map on top of it, notice there's 2 black dots. Okay, one of them sure is roughly where the houses and the barns are today, but the other one's out there in the fields. And honestly, I don't remember whether I asked Derek or Derek told me first that there used to be the old house out there, but the well is still there, and it looks like that. There's the old well, and the old home site was right here, out in the middle of the field. And so I asked Derek, hey, do you think I could swing my metal detector out there? He said, sure. My son and I went out there in the plowed fields, and every time that they plow, more stuff comes up. And at first, it was a bunch of iron stuff, horseshoes, or at least that's a half a horseshoe, nails, pieces of old plow implements. But then some cool things started coming out of the ground. The first one was this 1831 matron head large cent. So almost 200-year-old U.S. large cent. It's somewhere over there. And that came out of the ground in July of 2020. A couple more of them came out of the ground. An even older one, a draped bust, large cent, an 1810 classic head. So large cents were coming out of the ground from the U.S. from roughly 200 years ago. Cool buttons came out of the ground, and I don't know how many buttons I ultimately found in that field. Derek and his daughter Layla have most of them because she really likes buttons, including this Royal Navy button from the Revolutionary War. Don't know why it was in the field. I tried to research why it would be in the field. I couldn't find any connections of names of people back to the Revolutionary War, so I'm still not sure to this day why it was there. But we put it in a nice display, and I think the backers still have that display. We also found British coins, so going back even further. The top one is probably the oldest coin I've found. It's a King George I halfpenny. It doesn't have a date on it. It's very, very hard to tell what the heck it is, but it would have been from that time frame of 300 years ago. The other one is interesting because it's a King George III Hibernian. It says if you look really carefully, it says 1783. That's a 3. This one says 1782. And the reason is the British government stopped making them in 1782. This is a contemporary counterfeit that somebody made in the late 1700s. And even more weird, those are exactly the same coins that were on that Faithful Steward ship coming over from Ireland and shipwrecked off of Delaware. So I was detecting Delaware like crazy, and it turns out found one of those coins in Backer Farm Field. But my favorite thing that I think I found there is this 1753 Spanish 1 real. So it's about the size of a nickel. It's over there on the table. This one was minted in Lima, Peru. And the question I always get asked is, why was that there? Well, back before there was a U.S. mint, but back before there was the United States, we didn't have currency. So we had to use other countries' currency. And British, Spanish, French, some Portuguese currency was used throughout the colonies. And they kind of just mixed and matched it without too much care for exactly where the country of origin was of the coins. So in all likelihood, all of these coins were dropped by the families living on that property. Or maybe that was where there was a lot of farm stand activity, much like there is today. Let me move on to historic aerial photography. We'll come back and you can ask questions later if you'd like, but I want to make sure I stick to 35, 40 minutes, give or take. So another tool that I use is aerial photography from this website, and it's called historicaerials.com. It has, for this area, aerial photography that goes back to 1931. So roughly 100 years back. You get to see a good change in the land throughout that 100 years, and you get to see where things were back then. A lot of roads that are now gone, obviously a lot of fields that have now been filled in with development. But the example I want to highlight using this technique is Moseley Field. So Moseley Field, a lot of people have never really been there. It's got sports fields. It's on the southern part of town. They're building those townhouses there where there used to be the convent. And so, there it is down Roxitticus Road. Today, it looks like that. There's a baseball field, football field, practice fields anyway, and soccer fields. And then there's where the development is happening. But that property has been in use actively by a lot of people for roughly 100 years. The sisters had, a different set of sisters, had, among other things, a school, a summer camp, and the retreat center. So a lot of activity. Well, here's again the way it looks on Google Maps today. Here's the way it looks Google Maps with the aerial view. But let's go back in time a little bit. So that's 2015. Hasn't really changed much. Okay, let's go back 30 years, 40 years even. Notice out here in the field, those were dormitories. Notice here, there were dormitories. Notice here, there was a swimming pool, more dormitories, a sports court. Let me go, it's gone now, okay? It was gone in 2015. But in 1979, it was there. And in 1953, these dormitories were there. And the baseball field had moved. It was actually there, but there was still a baseball field. So why is that cool? Well, the United States stopped making coins out of silver in 1964. So if you can find property before 1965 that hasn't been disturbed much, there's a decent chance of finding silver coins. And silver coins aren't worth a huge amount of money, but the neat part is they come out of the ground looking exactly like the day they went into the ground, because silver doesn't get broken down in the ground like other metals. So I love finding silver coins, as do most metal detectorists. And if you go back a little bit further, by the way, in 1931, there was really nothing out there. It was farm fields before the sisters started really using it for the camp. So when I went to Mosley Field, I did find a lot of coins. Those campers lost a lot of coins. This would have been one day. This would have been one day of finding coins and a whole row of silver coins. But it didn't stop there. It really just started. So I found, I had days where I found whatever that is, 8 of them. I found a beautiful, actually quite a few beautiful $50 size, $50 silver coins, a silver ring that's over there on the table. And another collection of another day out there where I found silver dimes. But the other thing I was finding is these religious medallions, religious charms, a lot of them, all sorts of different materials, although never a gold one. I don't know why, but a lot of silver ones. So many so that I actually gave most of them away, because I was out there detecting one day, and it was right about when they were starting to do demolition of the old Mosley mansion. And these women were there checking it out, because it turns out they had been students. And so they were seeing the mansion one last time before it was gone. And I was out there metal detecting, and they were like, "Oh, what did you find?" I said, "Well, I found one of these silver charms." And the woman that saw it got really excited. And I said, "Oh, does that mean something to you? Because to me, it's just something out of the ground." She was, "Oh yeah, that meant something to her." So I said, "Well, I got a whole bunch more at home." I drove home. I drove back down, I met up with them and basically gave them out to them, and they passed them on to their other ex-students. So those charms live on with students that may have lost them, for all we know. Okay, final research is using Google Street View and, of course, Maps and Google Earth. Here we are, we're in the church right now. That's what the Street View looks like if you go to Google Street View. But where I'm going to take you is over into Combs Hollow, okay? And we're going to specifically look at this area of Kramer Lane. Now, okay, there's a few heads nodding knowing this area. Okay, we're going to look specifically where that yellow arrow is. Now, if you're driving through there today, what you're going to see on the right-hand side is this bigger house set back from the road and this big old tree. But what most people don't know about Street View is that you can actually see older dates. You can go back in time using Street View. And so using Street View and going back to 2016, you can see where the old Kramer house was before it was torn down and the new house was built back from the road. Let me do that one more time. Watch the tree. And then as it changes, the house was much closer to the road. So using that information, I went and knocked on their door. I said, "Hey, did you know, there was the old house? Of course, we tore it down. Do you mind if I metal detect the front yard?" They were like, "No, we don't care. It's fine." So I start metal detecting and found buttons in this area, but off to the right in these bushes, these are the buttons, and then a large scent that I found in that front area. This iron, ugly looking thing is actually a shoe buckle that, like the pilgrims would have worn, made out of iron that popped out of the ground right there up by that tree. But my favorite things that came out of the ground there were 2 New Jersey coppers. So what is a New Jersey copper? Well, right after the United States was granted independence, but before the US really got its act together, certain states started making their own coins. They only did it for a few years. There were only about 3 or 4 million of these Jersey coppers made by the state of New Jersey. They have a horse on one side and a shield on the other side. Vermont, Massachusetts, and Connecticut are the other 3 states that were making coins at roughly the same time. And these are kind of one of those really exciting things for a detectorist to find. I've found, I think, 3 in my life. You know, and these were in pretty good shape, all things considered, because they're made out of copper, and copper interacts with the soil, and so they get eaten away. But at least you can tell what they are, and they came right from that front yard. They were probably driving trucks and cars and construction vehicles over top of them, you know, for who knows how long while they were building that house. Anyway, I felt very, very lucky to find them, and the homeowner didn't want them. Had no interest. I mean, was excited that I was excited, but they had no interest in the history. So, by the way, in 1853, the reason it's called the Kramer House is because there were actually 2 houses. This one is the one I'm talking about, and it says Kramer on it. And then there was another one right here. You'd never know it was there. But I asked, it's as you drive Calais, and if you're going to the trailhead that's straight ahead and you don't turn down Combs Hollow, it's on your right, up on the hill in somebody's front yard in the woods. And so I asked them if I could metal detect their front yard. They were like, sure, absolutely. And I did find a British coin there from the 1700s too. So it's neat to use this map to find where there used to be old houses and now they're gone. Where we are, by the way, was called Water Street, if you're curious. You know, this was Water Street, and you can see how densely populated it was. It was really similar to the downtown of Mendham. So 2 different towns. The one other thing I'm going to highlight is this thing called Harmony up in here. I call it Harmony Village. I'm not sure if that's actually what it was called, but Harmony is gone. It's under Clyde Potts Reservoir. So when they built Clyde Potts Reservoir, they actually submerged a distillery and 4 or 5 houses that were up in there. But a few of the houses are still, the stone foundations are still out there in the woods, back behind the reservoir. So if we zoom in, and it's a little blurry, but if you zoom in on that, and then you overlap, oh, that didn't work as well as I wanted it to. Okay, yeah, there you go. You can kind of see that, you know, the roads kind of line up, but the reservoir is now over top of where there used to be buildings. And then, by the way, I mean, these roads that go up through the woods are still there. And then this is the trail. So that today's road stops right about there, and then a trail goes through the woods, but it used to be a road. The reason I really showed this one is because it's a great example of using what's called LIDAR, or light detection and ranging. Basically, a helicopter or an airplane or a drone flies over and it uses lasers to shine on the ground, and it can go through the trees and see changes in the ground or stone walls or old foundations. And I'm just beginning to experiment with this, but on this map, obviously you can see the reservoir dam. But back here in the woods, you can see a couple of the foundations. If you look for things that are square, because nature doesn't typically make square things. So you can see that there's 2 foundations there, and then these rows of trees were clearly planted by somebody into rows. So anyway, I'm not going to talk about LIDAR any further. It's just another tool that I'm experimenting with, and just one more way to potentially find things out in the middle of nowhere that you otherwise might walk right by. Okay. So I'm going to finish up by showing you examples of a few other things I've found, some of which are here, some of which aren't, and then open it up to questions and answers. I like finding buttons. I've found a lot of military buttons throughout the years. So other than the Royal Navy one that the backers have, War of 1812 is the oldest one I've found, and it still had silver on it, which was kind of neat. So. Civil War ones are pretty common, but this Excelsior Brigade one from the state of New York is not all that common. It was in terrible condition, by the way. Like it looks that ugly. The back had fallen off of it because it's a 2-piece button, and if water gets in the middle, it starts to break down from the inside, and the thing kind of explodes. And that's what happened to that one, sadly. Some World War I buttons. And then this weird button here is what's called a tomback spun back button. So it's made of a special kind of brass called tomback. And you can see maybe that there are circles on there. It was hand spun by somebody to make those scratches, to concave out the back of the button. The reason Tomback's interesting is because they didn't just make buttons out of it. They made a crottle bell. They made crottle bells out of it. That bell is actually not here. It's in my Christmas stuff because we hang it on our Christmas tree with a little red bow on it. But I brought some other crottle bells with me, including this one. And the thing I love about crottle bells is that when you dig them out of the ground and you clean all the dirt out of them, they still ring. 200, 300 years later, they still ring, which is neat. Crottle bells, I mean, this isn't probably, again, I'm not a professional or a historian, but my understanding is that crottle bells have this loop at the top and were attached as a singular bell to an animal or a sleigh or a cart, whereas these sleigh bells are more commonly what you think of on a piece of leather strapped together, a whole bunch of them. But they're both types of bells, and most of those are there under the case. I found a ton of buckles. And maybe this is a moment to say there's buckles in that plastic bin over there. I brought that because I thought there might be kids, which there aren't. But you know, if there were kids, I was going to say you can have anything you want in that plastic bin, including the buckles or whatever. But adults, you can too. I just think that most of you will probably think it's garbage because it kind of is. But nevertheless, I find a lot of buckles. I find a lot of other horse-related or cart-related items, including these circles called Rains guides. Those are sitting over there in the display case. Find a lot of spoons and some jewelry. This spoon is special. It came from India Brook Park, and I didn't think much of it. It's silver, but until I looked at the bottom and it had this WL on it, and I was able to actually track that back to a silversmith in Boston from the 1700s. Don't know how it got there. It clearly broke where they had impressed the WL into the spoon. But yeah, that back mark is clearly tied to, I forget his name, unless I put it in here, which I didn't. I could look it up if you're really curious. That big giant spoon, and it's big, that's a dime. That came out of Backer Farm Field, and Derek reminded me I want to mount it on wood with one of the frames instead of on cardboard, which is how I gave it to him. But anyway, big spoons like that came out in 3 pieces, by the way. This really awesome shoe buckle frame came from a house at the end of Main Street here in Brookside. I gave it to the homeowner in that frame because the homeowner also had an old baby's shoe from the attic, which apparently was good luck. When they built the house in the 1700s, they would put a baby's shoe up in the rafters. And so this is displayed, I guess, with that baby's shoe that they had found. I highlighted this piece. It technically came from Long Valley. It didn't really come from Mendham. But I absolutely love it because it's a silver charm bracelet, and it has dates from the early 1900s that I think are 2 birth dates, an engagement date, and a wedding date of a couple. You can see it's made of 4 different shapes: heart, spades, clubs, and diamonds. Somebody was a card player, apparently. But the thing that makes it neat to me is that if you look very closely, it says 6pence there. These were British 6pence silver coins that someone repurposed into charms on that bracelet. Thought it was super cool. Gave it to the farm family, the family that they were able to track it back to a great aunt and a great uncle, that it was their bracelet, and so it's been reunited with them. Some of you may have read in my Metal Detecting Mendham posts on Facebook about this Jesuit missionary ring. Tonight, because you came, I'll tell you the secret of where it came from. So the Combs Hollow, or they call it Coleman's Hollow on here, this property technically extends all the way up into this area right next to a road called Dolby or Dobie Bridge Road. It's a dead-end road. It ends in a trailhead, but there are 2 home sites, one of them buried in pricker bushes so bad that you can't get to it, but the other one that's not. And I was metal detecting back behind that because it's property owned by Randolph. It's public property. And that's where the Jesuit missionary ring came from. Again, I don't know why it was there. I can't confirm, obviously, that there was, you know, Native American presence there, but it's still a really neat piece of history that we were luckily able to save. Some of you saw the rings that are under the display case over there. This is that class ring that was returned to the owner from Daytop's field in the back. But the other thing, these couple rings here are rings that I found as part of something called the Ring Finders. It's a website. If you go on the internet and you look for the Ring Finders, there are people all over the country that have signed up to help people find their rings. I was on there for this area. I found probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 for people. I also failed at least a dozen times to find what the person was looking for, but I tried. This is a beautiful signet ring that was found right in the borough where a tree had fallen down in where the old roots were. And I gave it to the homeowner. He has it. He uses it to emboss sealing wax on his Christmas cards today, still. And then just another ring I had found just recently here in Brookside and turned over to the property owner. Some other weird finds, a 1932 license plate that I decided to restore. It didn't come out of the ground looking like that. It was actually folded in 3 pieces and just this rusty hunk, but I unfolded it and decided to paint it and make it look nice again. A Central Railroad of New Jersey luggage tag. Some locks and some keys that don't go with those locks, obviously. And then I love just finding other types of coins. So Indian heads, I've found only one Flying Eagle cent in my whole life. So the Flying Eagle cent was only made for 2 years. It was the transition from large US cents to the penny size that we know today. People hated the design, so they immediately threw it out and replaced it with Indian head cents. But I've found one of these. They're really hard to find, and they're usually in bad shape. But I love finding these. This is from a Standing Liberty quarter. Absolutely beautiful eagle on the back of it. The problem is often they don't have dates on the front because they were designed poorly and the date rubs off. That's one of my favorite coins I've found, and it sits on my work desk, my desk at home. Just because I think that if you were to try to picture an old coin, that would be that's what I would picture, a barber coin. Now that one happens to be a $50, and the black, they have a name for this, the hewing, I think. Sorry? Toning, thank you. I couldn't remember the word, but the toning is just right in my eye anyway. And then I talked a little bit about this at the very beginning. It turns out that's a 1775, not a 1773. Over there it's going to say 1773. But that's a British halfpenny, the one that was found in the back of Daytop, for those of you that were here for the pre-meeting, pre-presentation Q&A. And then I'm going to just basically say, here are some interesting resources that you might want to follow up on if, after this presentation you want to learn more. Obviously, the Mendham Township Library has some great materials, and I combed through some of their old books. I also was watching old DVDs of the gentleman that did a lot of historical presentations. I can't remember his name. Thank you so much. Yes. I was watching those DVDs just to learn what I could learn about some of the different preserves and some of the history. So that's all in the library. This is a link to the Rutgers website that has the old Morris County map on it. Historic aerials I talked about. Historic Mapworks is another great website out there. They don't have the 1853 map, but they have an 1868 map of Morris County and specifically Mendham. And the neat part about that website is you don't have to do what I did, which is like overlay things manually. They'll overlay the old map on the new current map for you on their website, which is neat, for free. TreasureNet, if none of you know who TreasureNet is, if you like reading about stuff that people find, TreasureNet is a great website for that. I've been posting on there for many, many years, and I'd encourage you to just take a glance. If you haven't watched the Detectorists TV show, it's not just about metal detecting. It's actually a well-written comedy with some great actors from England, and I would highly recommend it just for fun. There are some Facebook groups beyond the About Mendham group, like New Jersey metal detecting. This one called Colonial and Early U.S. Coins and Artifacts shows you some cool old stuff, some really special old stuff that people find. Every so often people find George Washington inaugural buttons. I have not been lucky enough to find one yet. That's kind of like, you know, the holy grail in my world of trying to find things. There's also another Facebook group called ID Me that I turn to if I don't know what something is, and someone will answer you in 15 minutes that's an expert. It's unbelievable. And then there are a couple of YouTubers out there that I would recommend. Brad, who is known as Green Mountain Metal Detecting, is, I believe he is absolutely for real. He works his buns off going out there to metal detect, finds some amazing things, and talks about what he finds, which I love. The other guy I just like because he's an interesting personality is Merrill, who has the YouTube handle Metal Detecting NYC. I just love to hang out with the guy, you know, and so if you're interested in watching someone metal detect, those two gentlemen are interesting. With that, I'll open it up to questions. Go ahead, sir. That's a fair question. Here's the thing. There have been plenty of folks that metal detected in Mendham long before I did. Some of them were in this room, and yet I still found a lot of great things. So I think there's a lot still out there to be found, and it also depends on expectations. And if you go into it thinking you're going to find amazing treasure that's going to be worth a ton of money, you're probably going to be disappointed anywhere you metal detect. But if you go into it with the open-mindedness to who knows what I'm going to find and it'll be interesting to find anything, there's plenty to find out there. The other thing is there's still plenty of private properties that have probably never been touched. And if the person that owns it is willing to give permission, those can be a great opportunity. Friends, family members, neighbors, you know, that sort of thing work great. So schools are touchy. I've gone to some on a Sunday morning, and I still feel like I shouldn't be there. I don't know why. You know, kids kicking a ball are going to dig up more dirt than I'm going to dig up, but I still I don't know. But I think from what I understand, there's nothing illegal about it or wrong about it. There may be certain schools that have no trespassing, you know, signs like during non-school hours, that sort of thing posted, in which case you'd want to stay away from those. But sure. So there's 3 or 4 good brands out there that, and there's more than that probably. But this is a Mine Lab, and this is from a French company called XP. I like them for different reasons. This one's my general all-purpose metal detector. I'd take it into a park. I'd take it into a yard. This one is fantastic when you get into older home sites that have a lot of old iron. And then there's the brand called Nokta that makes really good ones. There's Garrett, which has been well known and is a US brand that's been making good detectors for quite a while too. So all of those brands are good. The other thing I would say is that balance the budget with how much you think you're going to enjoy the hobby. Don't overspend because you have to have the best. My son and I eased into it with a $100 white Prism on the beach that went beep. And we liked that enough that we bought a different whites that was a little more expensive, a little more sophisticated. We liked that enough that I bought this one. And I've been using this one for many, many years. And then recently, this was my Christmas present, or, you know, Christmas present I got because I wanted to be able to dive with it, frankly. And it'll let me dive. You know, you can take it underwater. So I would say that if you're okay with spending $600-700, a Mine Lab Equinox is probably the best detector in that range that balances all the features that are out there. Other questions? I know you had one. I have not. So what I've found is that while I'm willing to go out into the woods and dig an old home site, the ones that are closer to roads like this that are really popular of kids walking home from school or whatever have a lot of trash. And I only get a limited amount of time to detect, so I kind of tend to skip those locations where I can anticipate there's going to be a lot of trash to sort through. Plus, the trash is usually on top of anything good, and that's the other frustrating part. But thank you for pointing that out, though. Go ahead.
I have like a 30 some odd year old white.
Yep.
It would still be kind of cool to use it,
Absolutely. And there are even some folks that like retro metal detectors for whatever reason. And the other thing that's a nice rule of thumb is that once you get to know a machine, you don't need the newest and greatest technology necessarily. You really, knowing the machine is maybe more important than the actual technology in it. And so I think that, if you got to know those, and those whites are good machines, for their time. There was an innovation recently called multi-frequency. And the basic idea is that the detector will send out multiple frequencies simultaneously, and the computer inside will combine the information from those different frequencies to give you a more accurate idea of what's there. And older whites, any older detector doesn't have that. It'll have a single frequency. But I mean, other than that, it'll still go beep. And it's heavy, that's the only problem. Yeah. So, yeah, but people do like those retro detectors. Yes, sir. What do I do for them? Yeah. I wear as many layers as I can. I use permethrin, or however you say it, treated clothes. I also put off on it, and I'll still get one or two that sneak on me a year, and then I make sure I check myself every single time I come out of the woods. Yes?
How do you clean off?
Great question. It depends on what it's made out of. So silver, you can wash it off and lightly use maybe a toothbrush, because coin collectors, I mean, listen, truthfully, if a coin's been in the ground, it's going to be scratched all up anyway. But nevertheless, coin collectors still say don't, rub it too hard, silver. Copper, on the other hand, I'm a believer, and I think the general stance is don't ever get it wet. Use dry material, dry ways of cleaning it. So if I find an old copper coin that's caked with dirt, I have these things, I didn't bring them, darn it. They're called Andre's pencils, Andre with an A. Yeah, you can find, so Andre's pencils are a literal pencil, actually two different ones, and then the neatest thing, it's a pencil-like thing full of really tightly wound steel wool. And the steel, if you use the pencil to get away the large amount of dirt, and then you use the steel wool thing to clean it away, it doesn't damage the coin too much, and you've got the best chance of seeing whatever the image was underneath it. But it's hard. So, thank you. So those I actually very aggressively clean. So if I found a horseshoe, right, or an old square nail or something, I would use a wire brush. I'd use a wire wheel grinder to get the rust off of it. I think you can put it in vinegar to get some of the rust off. But I tend to find the what do they call them? The analog, or like using a wire wheel brush is enough for me. So where are my axe heads? So like these axe heads, two of them are from the 1800s. One of them we believe is from the 1700s. So I wire wheeled the heck out of these things. And then I ground back an edge just so it kind of looked like an axe still. Because when they came out of the ground, you wouldn't have even known what they were, but other than the size of it, right? Yeah. So wire brushes, wire wheel grinder, and then I treated them with oil. Let's see, I baked them in the oven to get all moisture out of them, and then I treated them with oil, and then I sprayed them with, yeah. So.
You ever use electrolysis?
I have. I find it destroys the item as much as it kind of saves it, unfortunately. Yeah, you can do electrolysis on iron items, but it's tough on the item.
I've heard that some items shouldn't be cleaned.
Correct.
To do some work with it.
And that's right. If you found a George Washington button, inaugural button, as soon as I knew it was one, I would freeze and put it in like a little box and not touch it again and maybe get an expert to deal with it. But keep in mind the majority of what you find is destroyed. And I'm looking for an ID. I want to know what it is because I hate the mystery. And so I have friends that I go out with, and when they're in the field, they'll vigorously clean a coin. I won't do it in the field. I like to bring it home. I like to put it under a magnifying glass and lights, and I like to be careful about it. But ultimately, I will clean it until I know what it is. Back in the back.
But what would you say was the oldest item that you have found to show that?
I think that the item that I think is oldest is that Jesuit missionary Native American trade ring. Because that specific, I got two experts to confirm its identity, and one of the experts says that specific style was late 1600s. But that's about the oldest I've been able to definitively date something back to.
And have you been able to then take that site and align it to any historical maps that we have in the area?
Yes, but none of them go back that far. So it's a guess. You know what I did do in that one specifically is we know that there was a Lenni Lenape village in Whippany, and we know there was one in Succasunna. And if you draw a line between them, roughly along that line is where this ring was found. So, I mean, listen, you could make up a story in your head that someone was walking from one village to the other and accidentally dropped it. Who knows, right? I wish the item could speak to us, but that would be my speculation if I had to speculate.
So would you say this was a thriving community by 1720?
Certainly. Yeah, I mean, out in front of the Black Horse it says, Mendham 1742, but I think that, yeah, folks were here long before that. And there's a lot of history. I brought one of the history books, of the Mendhams, but there is good history in the library about our wonderful town. Go ahead. Yeah, I've never had any luck. I don't know why that is. I just may be unlucky, but because you would think that it might be an area of commerce. The other thing I did along those lines is there are on the 18, it's either 53 or 68 map, there are two brickyards in Chester. One of them's on public property, and one of them is on private property. And I detected both of them, the second one with permission. On the first one, I did actually find an old British coin from there. It's in the book somewhere over there. The other one, unfortunately, the property owner had built a lake on top of where the brickyard was. So I had more luck at a brickyard than I did at any mill.
Have you say that more often than not you are turning over all the items there?
So I usually, the way I knock on the door is to say, I live in town, hobbies of metal detecting, happy to show you anything I find. If you'd like any of it, you can have it. About, 4 in 10 property owners want something, 6 in 10 don't really care. But I do offer for sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm curious, have you gone to Junkie Hollow, where they have all of the, sorry.
It's okay. I talked about that as a strictly prohibited spot. The Morristown National Historic Park is strictly off limits. What I did do is talk to the Girl Scout camp that's across the street. The Girl Scout camp contact asked their board of directors, and the board of directors said, let's just say heck no. And I asked, is that a heck no today, or is that a permanent heck no? And it was a permanent heck no. They wanted nothing to do with somebody metal detecting their camp. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have never asked them, have never tried. I am intimidated by the large amount of property that is cemetery, and I didn't even put that on the list. I should have. I'm sorry. Cemeteries are also strictly off limits, not because there's a law, but just because it's the right thing to do. You know, but yeah. So and I was even, by the way, side item. I was even granted permission to detect down in Delaware where we're moving. A farmer had a very small family plot from the 1800s in his yard. And he was like, I don't care if you did, but I didn't go anywhere near it. I just wouldn't, it didn't feel right.
Did
So,
you try Pitney Farm? No, on Fulton?
yes, I was able to get in there before they renovated,
Yeah.
developed, and made it into a park. So, go ahead.
But I'm curious if there is like a map at the library where people in early 1800s.
Yep, 1853 is the best map back to then. Yeah, there are some hand-sketched ones that didn't have a lot of detail, but the only usable one, or the earliest usable one, is 1853. Yes?
If you look at, and I just speak about Mendham Borough, if you look at Mendham Borough as a whole,
Mm-hmm.
what percentage would you say have, or even have you been able to scan within the?
Oh, 2%. 2% or something.
So there's lots yet to be.
Yeah,
possibly.
I started one winter creating a map of every property I had ever detected with colors. I started to get kind of crazy about it, and then I abandoned that project. It was over the top. But the draft of that did start where you could actually segment off little properties, and yeah, anyway. But no, I would say I've done very little of the town.
And yet you found so many things.
Right. Yeah, it's a reminder of how much we're walking over every day and walking by every day. And
And I think the history of the area.
yes. Go ahead.
Do you walk in a grid or you just?
First time on a site, I'll just walk around rather quickly to see if I can hone in on areas that may have not been disturbed. Like Taylor, I did at Taylor's house recently. We found a couple of places that hadn't been disturbed, but a lot of places that had on her property, and then zero in on that area. And if I were to get a chance to go back, which I might not because we're moving, I would grid it off, right? And Backer Farm, I walked that field so many times. I grid it this way, then I grid it this way, then I regrid it this way. I did, yeah. Yeah. So I was using a program on my phone called TectoTrack. Like not detect, or they cut off the DE and it's just TectoTrack. And it tracks where you're walking with your phone and it overlays it on the map. And I stopped using that, but that's just because I haven't found a place like Backer Farm where I could actually grid it off and go over it and over it and over it and still find things. That property was very, very special. I haven't. And another thing I have is what I have saved is on Google Maps. Anytime I'm interested in a site or I drive past an old house, I'll mark it as a favorite on Google Maps. And I've marked some places that are old mines as favorites, but I've just never had the time to go to them, or I've had other places to go instead. Go ahead.
I just want to say one other thing.
Okay.
Be reported that you put all this stuff on Facebook, and I'm sure there are plenty of people who are not even here tonight, and you just illuminated so much history
Completely.
about
Well, thank you.
And so I think it's awesome, and so many other people do, and I just want to say
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I've been very lucky to be able to do it, and thank you so much for sitting through all of this evening. Yeah, so I'm going to stick around. If you're interested in any of the things that I have out on display up here, feel free to come up and we can talk about it further. Thanks again.